All right. We are back. Season 2, Beth, of the Media Show. Kind of getting started here in early March. Just throw this out there. It is my birthday today. So I turned 55 here on the show with you all, and I'm really excited. We've got a fantastic guest. Beth, give us a little rundown of our guest and tell us a little about what we're going to learn here today.
Yeah, great. So welcome back, everybody, to season 2 of the Media Show. This is our space to explore the converging and ever-changing worlds of media and advertising. Shaped by our years in the industry, Craig sitting on the sales side, me on the buy side. Through the Media Show, we dive into how it all works. How do the edge you see find you? And along with our guests, we debate where it's all headed. So speaking of our guests, today we have Ed Hersh. Ed is a veteran media executive, producer, consultant. He specializes in the development, storytelling, and execution of true crime and nonfiction programming, my favorite genre. He is the founder and chief creative officer of StoryCentric, which advises networks, producers, platforms, drawing on his senior roles at ABC News, A&E, Court TV, Investigation Discovery. He is frequently called on to speak within the industry, and also my colleague as an adjunct at Syracuse University's Newhouse School.
Go Orange.
And pardon me?
Go Orange.
Go Orange.
Right. Orange is in the house. Sorry, Craig. So thank you, Ed, very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We have so much to talk to you about. I first reached out to you because I have spent the last month just completely steeped into the Nancy Guthrie case. I wake up to it, I fall asleep to it. It's all very unhealthy, and I should probably be seeing a therapist. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we dive into the case specifically, why don't you share a little bit about your history and why we're talking to you today about what I have come to adopt, the Nancy Benet Ramsey case, thanks to No Filter with that.
Well, thank you again for having me. And I have my morning froggy throat, so forgive me for that. So, the interesting thing is that true crime and true crime, okay, is ubiquitous across for years and years, right? As the media is changing, the platforms have changed, the storytelling has changed, but a true crime, everything from Forensic Files in the early 2000s to Dateline to now Netflix, HBO. There's a huge audience for true crime, and from years and years and years of attending focus groups on this subject matter, and my background is for about 20 years at ABC News, but then another 20 years in cable and at A&E, and at the beginning of the true crime era at A&E and at Court TV back when they were doing documentaries and long form TV, and then Investigation Discovery, which became an incredibly popular true crime channel for Discovery, and then having my own business, which advises networks and producers on their storytelling and on their program development strategy. It's stunning how the things that the audience tells you and the focus groups tell you, which is, people talk about focus groups like they're separate. They're not. It's what the audience tells you, right? And what the audience tells you over and over again, it kind of breaks down into a bunch of different things. There are memorable characters, right? There, when you think about true crime shows, think about Dateline, think about, the latest show on those Murdoch, murder family down in South Carolina. It takes us inside the criminal mind. It takes us access into a different world, right? Inside police and procedurals, right? But the biggest thing is it's high stakes. Chopped on the Food Network, The stakes are whether somebody gets to be, a top chef or a work in their own restaurant. This is life and death.
Take
right?
it easy, Ed. We love our steaks on this program. But
Right. They're on the, there's a dead body at the bottom of the stairs, and there's an hour to find them, right? And therefore it's a ticking clock. It's high stakes with a ticking clock. And you think about ticking clock, that every great TV show has or a movie has a ticking clock, right? There's 24 being the biggest one. But in a crime show, fictional or true crime, that there's an hour to solve it, and they're going to solve it, and they're racing against time, and the killer is out there, and it's the first 48 hours and all that stuff. And we'll get into the Nancy Guthrie of that. There's some, I didn't know that, right? That audiences tell us, like, wow, new insights into forensics, technology, and human behavior. And there's an opportunity to play along, right? And that's in the Nancy Guthrie case too. Like you're playing Clue, right? And especially now with social media, everybody's and we're asking for doorbell cameras and tips, so everybody is an expert, right? And with that one tip from the lady down the street with the Ring camera, that could have something, right? And there's resolution, and hopefully at the end, and we either for good or bad, there's resolution and closure for the victim, cops, and her family. Every episode of Dateline ends after the guy is found guilty with the family, a low shot of a family putting flowers on a tombstone and saying, for the SHO family, it's little comfort, but at least we caught the criminal. So,
Ed, wait a minute, Ed. Hold on a second. What about Keith Morrison's voice?
Well,
The inevitable trip to Home Depot for the lime and the shovel.
Of course,
these are all things.
these are. But think about it. These tropes are on one hand are comfort food in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
These shows don't show the unsolved cases.
Mm-hmm.
These shows don't solve where the cops lost the rape kit for 5 years. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't show where they don't come up where they bungled the case. And one thing I don't know, I think I mentioned this to Beth at some point when we were chatting over a cup of coffee. A lot of people confuse true crime with investigative journalism. Okay, there's a difference between investigative journalism is great, right? Investigative documentary is that's what Frontline does, right? That's what 60 Minutes does when it's at its best. Okay, they are uncovering new facts. Most true crime stories, okay, are not investigative stories. They're stories of investigations. They tell the past tense story. They often tell it written in the present tense, and then officers arrive at the house. But that happened in the past. These are adjudicated cases. So you follow the story of the investigation, right? And that way who you have the prosecutors, you have the families, you have the other people involved, and you don't do the story until you've locked up access to all those people. Now, that being said, there's still a lot of really interesting stuff with cold cases, and it ends with them, coming closer to the end, and it doesn't really resolve. But in generally speaking, okay, these are stories of investigation, and people find closure with them. They're sort of the comfort food of documentary because they reassure you. They're aspirational. Somebody said in a focus group I sat in that we showed them, and it was a particularly charismatic and dogged investigator talking about his work. And she said, boy, if I had a relative who was, missing or a murder in my family, that's the guy I would want investigating them, right? Mm-hmm. So there's part of it is aspirational, just like medical shows have the same sort of thing. Medical shows, right? They're aspirational. The doctors in medical shows, they're not the ones who are off playing golf, or you can't reach them, or you text them and they'll get back to you someday. they're in there, they're working, they're trying to save lives. And you say to yourself, boy, if I ever had to go to the hospital, that's the team I'd want, right?
Yeah.
And George Clooney, I actually read an interview with George Clooney when he was shortly after he was in, and he's such a smart guy, about the audience when he was in ER. And he said that was the appeal of ER. All these diverse people, you don't really know much about them. You just know when they come together, they're the team you want when something happens. You know, Chicago Med's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So we're getting off the true crime, but
I do love the idea of that comfort food. You know, I was talking to my husband yesterday about this, and the fact that I can fall asleep. Like if I want to fall asleep, I turn on a Dateline. And he's like, that makes no sense. Like, how is that possible? And I'm like, well, I don't really care how it turns out. He's like, if you don't care how it turns out, why are you watching it? But it is just sort of that. I know they're going to catch
tell
them.
Terry, I understand. I monitor Paula's receipts from Home Depot. I'm waiting for those couple bags of lime. I mean, she stays up. I fall right. I mean, I don't fall asleep when I see those shows on there.
And yet, it's interesting to me.
I reassured Terry. He does sleep with one eye open, but I have reassured him that I am not going to prison for him because they don't serve wine in prison.
Then I got to tell you something, that you don't watch enough of these because it's always the husband murders the wife. Right. It's never the other way around in those shows. And the other way. And if the wife murders the husband, it's only because she's been manipulated by a guy to do so, right? And I'm telling you but you bring up an important point again. Ad sales, okay. The audience for these, it doesn't mean men never watch these, but the primary audience for these true crime shows are women 25 to 54. Okay, and it is a reason you see mostly men doing women evil, and it's also another reason you see the interviews are mostly with women, right? And women victims and victims' families. And somebody on work, they become so cliched. Every Dateline, when it begins with, Beth Egan was a promising young professor at Syracuse University.
Late for the
party. Yes, a professor with her whole life ahead of her, right? And she dates a guy in a white T-shirt and a pickup truck. You're not going to see Beth anymore. Okay, she'll be gone before the first commercial. But there's a comfort to that. But again, there's a demographic appeal to that. I believe me. I have come to I appreciate the audience. There is an audience for this. And again, because it's not investigative journalism, it's stories of investigations. Those stories are tailored to appeal to an audience that loves them. And what's fascinating is, and I'm sure you guys have seen it too, is ubiquitous. And as every new story to every new platform, right? We went from broadcast TV, and then when cable got going, right, what did they need? They needed a lot of stories, a lot of shows in a hurry that could be made made quickly and relatively quickly and inexpensively. Well, if you think about it, right, all the true crime stuff and adjudicated stories, all of that is in the public domain, right? The trial, the evidence, when the story's been adjudicated, it's a matter of public record. So it's and the prosecutors are happy to talk about it. And often victims' families want to talk about it to keep the memory. It's not sometimes that's painted as, media manipulation and we're exploiting people. We couldn't make these shows, and these networks couldn't make these shows without the cooperation of the families. And they often do it because they really do want to give their side of the story to because often some of these people are vilified in court, that they want to keep, they want to paint a picture of the victim and talk about how great they were. And so, but they're able to be produced because sadly, you never run out of stories.
Mhm.
You know,
Yes, ever, yeah.
That's actually a great segue to bring us around to Nancy, because
Yes.
that is one of the things that's been fueling so much of the conspiracies around this. And Craig and anyone who does listen to us frequently knows how much I love a conspiracy theory. But the fact that the family has been so out of the story, bar a couple of videos released by Savannah, the family has not been front and center in the story. What do you think's driving that?
Well, let's back up a little bit. First of all, the Nancy Guthrie story is, in an odd way, the perfect storm of what I've heard described as the true crime industrial complex, right? It's, if you think about it, right? Podcasting, that was, I'm going to say, is look at how, it was on TV, and then podcasting exploded. Serial was a total game changer, right? And then every, if you any day week, you look at the top 10 or 20, your top 20 podcasts on, on Apple or Spotify, half of them have some true crime relation, right? Dateline has turned themselves into a very profitable, popular podcast as well.
Which, by the way, what I find fascinating about the Dateline podcast, it is nothing more than the audio track from the television show.
That's right. Well, think about it. The Dateline, and that's the other thing why it has adapted so well to the podcasting era. They're not, it's not really a visual medium. It's not.
Exactly. They never show. Yeah, they never showed the real pickup truck. They always showed a pickup truck.
They don't have
file footage.
They don't have the real pickup truck
exactly.
for the most part. So what they do is they reconstruct. It's essentially a narrative. It's a narration. It's a narrative. The narrative is carried by the great voiced correspondents like Josh Mankiewicz and Keith Morrison, and the interview subject. Okay. But however, and that narrative is carried by them and illustrated with, crime scene photos, real footage, reconstructed footage. What's different, and we used to call those, Forensic Files has that big voice narrator too.
Right.
That has changed, by the way, in the Netflix and the streaming era. If you watch Netflix or Hulu or which have probably the bulk of streaming true crime documentaries, the voice of God narrator is disappearing. And because these are higher budget and take longer to make, the narrative is carried by the interviews for the most part. Of course, that requires more work and better interviews. You can't send out some intern with a sheet of paper, and it's not about the correspondent. It's about the story, and that's changed. And I always tell my clients who want to pitch something to Netflix, you can't just hire a narrator and do a show. You've got to. Dateline is, and 48 Hours, first 48 Hours Mystery. They're they're becoming anachronistic now in their storytelling, not in their story. So let's go to Nancy, though. The Nancy Guthrie story. Think about the elements of the Nancy Guthrie story that kind of add up to this. She is a people feel they know her. She is a guest in people's homes, Savannah, every morning. Okay. And because it's the morning show, she talks about her family. They feel like they know her. There's a lot of caring and sharing. And she talks about her life and her love and her this and her family. Okay. So you feel like you know her. Okay. There is. And so when a tragedy befalls her, right, then right away, okay, and she understands TV, and she's you can't find anybody who doesn't like Savannah Guthrie. It's not like some, and and it's a mystery, right? It's an ongoing mystery being played out in real time. Okay, so first she's gone, and where's the ransom note, and there's not the ransom note, and there's no video. You have that out there sheriff who will talk to will talk to anybody, and who knows how, if he'll be proven to be competent or not. Okay, but he'll talk to anybody. So he just talks. You have the victim, Nancy. It's every millennial or boomer's nightmare, right? That your elderly parent who wants the kindly elderly parent, by the way, who she's showcased on the Today Show a million times, so they feel like they sort of know her too. Okay, your parent says, I want to stay in my house, I don't want to go into assisted living, I'm fine, right? So you buy Ring cameras and you get people to check in with them and everything. I want to stay in my house. And this is, every adult's worst nightmare, right? And so it is, even just on the face of it, incredibly compelling, right? And then if you ladle on top of that it's being played out eyedropper, like there's no quick solution, they don't have leads, so that engages the conspiracy theories and the podcasters and every knucklehead with an iPhone who shows up at the crime scene doing selfies and saying, well, I found a candy wrapper on the corner that could be connected to the case, right? So this, we used to say, in journalism, information abhors a vacuum. This is a perfect example of that, right? There's no information, and if there is information, the FBI, for probably good reasons, and the sheriffs they don't always share everything they know. But then you have
the information. Wait 1 second on that information, and that information too. What I and Beth, you'll have to jump in here, Ed. The camera footage was a quote unquote discontinued account, and it kept rolling anyway.
That was one of the only twists that someday will be told. What apparently the camera footage, from what I understand and understanding the investigation, she had a Nest camera. Okay, she doesn't have not a cloud, but there's a paid account for a Nest camera that you pay to store the footage in the cloud. But what we didn't realize is, of course, so interesting for your privacy conversation on another day, is that somewhere between, along the way, was explained in a thing I read, somewhere in between the Ring camera and the big cloud server that stores it all, there are mini servers along the way that keep this stuff. And Google's, with the family's permission, obviously, Google's technologists, somehow trace this backward, all the network of servers and everything else, and were able to. It had been just like somebody explained that at your desktop computer, your hard drive gets recorded over, but when it's not it gets erased but not recorded over, and when it's recorded over, you can't recover it. But apparently this little snippet of that stuff they found somehow.
So they weren't paying the subscription, which I find fascinating, because I pay for a subscription for my Ring camera, so I know where my cat is. So why
but here's, listen to this conversation. I want to take back, right? Beth, you're suddenly now, this is your personal conversation about your cat and your Ring camera. Great. You're talking about, well, how did this whole, so listen to this. These are listen how much time we're blowing through here, no offense, on discussing the little minutia of the case. I rest my case, okay?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, it is fascinating. All right, but for important reasons, don't lose. We can sit here and discuss the nuances of the case. This is what happens with my team all the time. We discuss this case and that case. It's really important to understand, and it's a lot of what I do, not of how and why people watch this content and watch this story, because that is all about its success and its monetization and it's all that, which is that there's a tremendous appetite for this. There's a tremendous appetite for these sort of demographic stories. Elderly mother disappears, right? Woman marries, let's go back to Lacey Peterson story. You remember that, all right? That was the perfect demographic mystery story, right? This caddish, roguish, good-looking husband has this wife who's sitting at home, 7 months pregnant or whatever she was, and he's out fooling around with some blonde in a rowboat. All right. And they decide to kill his wife. That is right. Every woman, not every woman, but that is a nightmare of some women, that somehow the guy they're with is leading a secret life or is somebody else. So there are these things that we know the audience cares about. There's another part, especially for women, that plays into the Nancy Guthrie too. How do I protect myself? Right? I want to watch these shows so that I learn more about. Now, some of that may be what the researchers call permission to watch. In other words, you drive past a car wreck on the side of the road with, a mangled car and, 3 dead bodies being dragged out of it. And somebody says, well, I'm doing that because I really want to, I'm slowing down because I really want to learn more about traffic safety. That's not true. You're watching because you have this sort of voyeuristic pleasure. And there's voyeuristic pleasure in the true crime stuff. There's a bear there, but for the grace of God go I. There's a voyeuristic pleasure of, boy, I'm glad my husband isn't like that, or my wife isn't like that. So I'm saying there are all sorts of sociological and psychological factors that go into the behavioral factors that go into this true crime, love affair we have with true crime. Does that make sense? I hope
it does. And
yeah.
I also wanted to bring you on to talk a little bit about it from the media perspective.
Sure.
So you talked about your shift from linear to cable. We now have, as you mentioned, streaming, but the social media. So I'm also kind of curious, is some of the fascination with this case simply fueled by the media world that we live in? We had Fox News covering it almost 24/7. Why on earth? NBC for obvious reasons. But then just all these, Ashley Banfield, who just left News Nation and has her own podcast every single day.
You're answering, in some ways, you're answering your own question. Think about that. What drove CNN in its last iteration to prominence, because the guy was running it, Jeff Zucker, seized on that missing Malaysian airliner, MH370, right? That was still a mystery, and that pops up from time to time. So what is made to order for all this, the hours of cable television and endless podcasts and endless Instagram and streaming, right, is a mystery that gets played out with an eyedropper every day. It's an ongoing soap opera, right? The Gabby Petito case, and that, again, you asked about the media. They were chronicling their cross-country trip on Instagram. So at the same time, they're missing all those happy pictures of them, and and then there comes out that, well, yeah, they were stopped by a cop because they were having an argument on the side of the road. So that feels into it. And then the parents of the guy, the boyfriend, was protecting him, and then he got arrested, and then he committed suicide. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, but it comes out in drams, and again, I'll follow along. So that's really where it comes from, and the Instagram and all that stuff. It drives clicks. It's clickbait, and it's total clickbait. And adds nothing to and it's infuriating to me, and sometimes watching this coverage, since the case seems to sadly is going to end. She's not coming back, I don't think, and it's probably going to end in some terrible even more tragic than it is. and we see the tear-stained, without makeup videos from Savannah, who we know and love, and who knows if she's ever going to come back. Maybe she will, but when and how. It's a terrible. It's gone from a mystery to what is clearly going to wind up being somehow a terrible tragedy, and so, but still, I watch the network news. New information. There's literally no new information. That we've sent it for DNA testing. That's a story, but it gives them, hate to say it, it's clickbait. So if you hear at the top of the world news tonight, and new information on the internet, and the new information is, one of the policemen had a chicken salad sandwich out in front of their house, guarding the house. This just in. But that's what happens. People are looking for any new stuff. And sadly, I think it will become one of those brand name mysteries that we never know. John, you said JonBenet Ramsey, but it's why 25 years later is that still okay? Clickbait, because it's something we really want more answers to. The Kennedy assassination, that you can't get your mind, you can't get your head around it. And it's certainly something, JonBenet, it's such a heinous, some of the stuff is so heinous, you can't get your head around it. You can't understand that with all this technology and all these comps, why there's no clues and nobody found anything. You suspect that something was bungled. And, look, you talk about conspiracy theories, look at the Jeffrey Epstein thing and all the that's only going to fuel more stuff. That stuff wasn't investigated. There are people out there running around. So I think that's the world we kind of live in now. And I think that the Nancy Guthrie thing, sadly, because it's such a tragedy, just kind of checks off every one of those boxes about for being a magnet, being an unsolved mystery, and how it resonates with so many people because they're worried about their parent, and it awakens that, right? And how many people had put Ring cameras up, and you feel like you know them. She feels like a neighbor, and so I think a lot of true crime stuff, and that's the sort of, now Dateline. That's the appeal of Dateline. It's always like a nice girl. Now there's a lot of pushback on true crime. There is and we should probably mention it before we close out, that there's a lot of pushback. There are, of the missing white woman syndrome, and that true crime, it's always a cheerleader who's, gorgeous cheerleader. It's Gabby Petito. It's Savannah Guthrie's mother. Okay. And, living in an upscale house in a white suburb. Okay. And how many,
but wait, Ed, before you move on from that, I mean, as somebody who's not too deep into this, I mean, I've watched Fargo, and I know my way around some historical stuff with the Lindbergh baby and JonBenet Ramsey. It's very rare, though, that we're talking about an abduction of somebody 80 years old. No.
Well, it sure, but as probably is true. That's true, but again, I don't know if that only adds to the interest in the case, right? Yeah. Why would somebody, again, there's an inside the criminal mind thing. Who would do this? Why would that? Those are all the things that, of a whodunit, right? And by the way, if you think about true crime stuff that you've seen, there really falls into like 3 or 4 categories. There is the whodunit, right? That's the case situation we're in now. That's a lot of Datelines, right? Yeah. But who would do such a terrible thing, right? And then the investigation. There's also a genre, and I think you're seeing more of it with Netflix and others, called the howdunit. And that is the Fire Festival. That is the Wall Street scam. That is how did the Louvre? It's probably less violent crime. The Louvre
Heist, like
says how could somebody? It's the question you ask. How could somebody do that? It's scams, right? Wait a minute. How could somebody fool everybody on Wall Street? How could that? So there's a fascination with that, and then there's the why done it. We all know that Jeffrey Dahmer did terrible things, and Ted Bundy, and all these serial killers. So, but we're still stunned. Like, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody? What is it about somebody that could do that? So it's the why done it. It's the inside the criminal mind. We know who did it. We know the outcome. Now we want to try to know. Why could this? I'm sure there'll be a lot of Jeffrey Epstein. Well, I've seen a lot of Jeffrey Epstein how done it, right? That and he paid these people up. But at some point, somebody's going to do. Well, Jeffrey Epstein was locked in a refrigerator when he was 14 years old, or something like that, and we'll see that. So I think that those are all. That's our fascination, because again, I think it's just a fascination with human behavior. This is really what it is, right? We're talking about human behavior at its worst, and seeing people at their worst, right? The loss of on one level, right? Nancy and gets taken. Savannah, who was always perfectly coiffed and smiley and funny, sobbing with the tears rolling down her face. Her family. Who knows what the relationships are within her family. You made a point, Craig. We don't see maybe others, but I think they probably said, look, Savannah, you're our, you're the TV friendly person. You're an attorney. You're, Savannah is, we think of her as this kind of warm and fuzzy host. I worked with her at Court TV. She's an attorney who went to Georgetown and has a law degree, and was an anchor on Court TV doing trial coverage. So she's very familiar with the legal system and all that. So they may have said, look, you're the spokesperson. But I think that as every day goes by, I think we're sadder and sadder. And I think it is, to your point, it's moving further and further down the newscast, because they don't have any. We said, right, you need an eyedropper of information every day to keep that story going. We haven't seen any eyedropper.
The last bit of information, right, that's been relatively controversial was this kind of shipping the DNA to Atlanta and not doing it. That was over a week and a half ago. Is that even worth anything? Or
I don't. Who knows, right?
Yeah,
they're doing everything they can. So again, I think that this is to me sort of my summation is that this story does a bunch of things. Obviously, it hits every difficult chord of true crime. It illustrates how true crime has morphed and changed in the social media and streaming era. Okay, and I think it indicates what the appeal. It's a lens into what the appeal of this is. And I'm just only sorry that it's based on somebody's family tragedy that we're talking about this, because let's remember what that is. But it does absolutely play to all the forces at work in the media ecosystem right now, which is
it's quadrupled the podcast. So I looked at these numbers earlier. 6.5 million Americans listened to a true crime type podcast in 19. It's over 20. I have the number. It's close to 20 million in 2025. The time spent is because they're long. They're they're galactically long. So you have this unbelievable amount. Now, will you see this as a resurgence of the television product, or do you think we're already there with
linear television? Look, linear television is going away. We kind of not going. I wouldn't say going away.
Yeah.
But linear television is not the place. You'll see streaming. I can't imagine when this comes to some resolution or not. you will see, and I think they're being respectful too until we know more. But I can't imagine you won't see Peacock, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, all doing the search for Nancy Guthrie stories, and they will get and I think another thing is you're not seeing it here because there's not. But the other little subgenre of this is the of some of these shows is, and I think the newest one is the way I describe it as the confluence of sex, crime, and celebrity. So R. Kelly, Finding R. Kelly, that show that was about the series that was Quiet on the Set, about the abuse during on the Nickelodeon series. These were huge. Every P. Diddy, this is like Jeffrey Dahmer. I was P. Diddy's dry cleaner. There's a different documentary about that every week. So that's another appeal too. Also, from an advertising and a programming point of view, those shows appeal to a younger audience, right? Those are not 25 to 54 women. Those are younger men and women who grew up with Nickelodeon or were fans of P. Diddy or were fans of R. Kelly. Okay, they play to the correct assumption I won't say assumption, but a correct suggestion that so many of these true crime things are focused on missing white women, and so there's more to it than that. So but I think, look, I haven't seen, to answer directly your question, Craig, I haven't seen any indication, okay, that that the true crime thing is going away. What you're going to see is it has adapted because it goes where the audience is, right? So the podcasting, it finds itself onto every platform, and because there's a big appetite for this among these very much diet true. There's a thing called Crime Con, right? You can go to if you want to, right? Literally, and that's all true crime podcasters and shows. So basically, whatever new platform shows up, be it social media and TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and podcasting, true crime finds its way there because it knows there's an audience for it.
Kind of like porn.
Yeah.
You said it, I didn't. You said it. So hopefully this was good.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I mean, if you just think about the numbers of people watching and listening, I mean, I'm with you both. I mean, I've been around for Quinones and all the different people who've hosted the shows. Obviously, there are parodies of Keith Morrison, some of the best of the best. But like this is, and now again, I don't always remember Lacey Peterson or Jean-Benet Ramsey, but obviously the line is just, it's extraordinary that we constantly go back to those things. So this is kind of an interesting chunk of media that. And you mentioned earlier, Ed, that a lot of advertisers were kind of, I don't really want to be next to that. And I've been there myself with other categories in travel, right? Like some companies don't want to be anywhere near travel because of, what could happen if somebody gets, an air accident or something like that. So here's a category that so grabs everybody, right? And particularly a very powerful audience, right? 18 to 54, or what did you guys say earlier? It's the main group that's into that 54-year-old female demographic. That's a big, powerful audience. This is grabbing that. I mean, my own personal experience is I hear it all the time. My wife listens, even when she's just kind of doing other stuff. I know this because I'm working on not one, but two accounts that are both calling for this as a category, as a genre of media to target. It's an interesting category.
Yeah, Ed, thank you so much for joining on this. And as you can tell, there's a ton more we can get into. Maybe we can get you back sometime.
Sure.
We didn't even touch on the advertising angle and how we think through those decisions. But I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your insight on a completely different angle around this case that's been infatuating everybody, and really understanding the motivators behind true crime. So thanks for coming on with us.
Yeah,
Well,
this was great.
Yes, thank you guys for having me on, and it's such an interesting area, and I've spent so long that I probably it's probably TMI for me on all this stuff. But I do think that as the Nancy Guthrie case started to unfold, I really did understand. Obviously we're all personally invested in it because we care as people. But at the same time, taking a step back in the kind of stuff I do, I really did see what it was. So hopefully it'll get resolved soon. But it is an interesting window into the audience and how that works. So thank you both very much for having me on, and happy to join you anytime. It was fun.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Take care.
Thanks, Ed. Have a good one.